Okay, so last time we left off with tide pools, looking at how these are very, very stressful environments, harsh conditions, but again, life's adapted to this. Species have adapted to these conditions over the course of their existence and their evolution, and life does live in these tide pools, but it's just amazing they can survive in such harsh conditions. So, okay, last marine biome. Well, we could kind of say this is marine slash terrestrial biome to mention here and talk about. It straddles the line between both biomes or between both the marine ecosystem and the terrestrial ecosystem. And these are what we call barrier islands. Now, a barrier island is a gigantic, well, could be a gigantic island, could be a small island, but it is a large island. Oh, don't need cap locks. It's a sand island that parallels the coastline. Okay, so over the course of the ocean's existence, because of how the currents work and how the wave action works, these sand islands accumulate. Pros and cons. I mean, people go, oh, this is a beautiful place to build a home. I'm right on the coast, right on the ocean. I got this beautiful view of the ocean in front of me. Problem is, they get a lot of storm action, a lot of wave action. The ecological value of a barrier island is that it will protect the coastline from storms, winds, tides, etc. That's what barrier islands do, is they protect the coastline. They act as a buffer zone. So as that big gigantic wave or that hurricane's coming in and it hits the barrier island, it slows it down, kind of decreases some of the energy from those waves or from those storms before it moves over and hits the true coastline. Now, the problem is when people decide to live and build homes on barrier islands, you're putting yourself right on the front line of that storm with no buffer, no protection between you and the open ocean. And that's just not a smart thing to do. But we see lots of high-end subdivisions, high-end homes built on barrier islands, and eventually those homes are going to be destroyed either by a hurricane or as the island continues to erode, homes collapse. Not the smartest of places to try to build and to live. So keep that in mind when you guys ever move out of the area and you go to the coastal areas. Don't live on a barrier island. Your home is going to be destroyed at some point. It's not an if, it's just a matter of when does it get destroyed. So, all right, so those are the aquatic marine ecosystems that we want to discuss and take a look at. Again, big thing I want you to do with all these ecosystems, kind of make sure you're comfortable with the key features, but then also what are the threats and what are the values of these ecosystems or these biomes, so then we can make hopefully good decisions as to efforts towards protecting them. So, all right, now let's get into the freshwater. Freshwater ecosystems. This is what we tend to focus more on and pay more attention to because we are more dependent upon them in some regards. You know, we get our drinking water from the freshwater ecosystems. We get the water to water our crops for agriculture, for industry. Most of this comes out of freshwater ecosystems. So we tend to have a greater awareness or concern towards these things. Where we're at geographically, we have a greater proximity to these than the ocean. So we hopefully are focused a little more on these. So when we look at freshwater ecosystems, there's distinct vertical zones, very similar to what we saw in the ocean. Different layers going from top down, where you'll have different abiotic conditions. So the layers are broken up into 4 general zones, or you could call them regions, whatever term you want to use here. The uppermost layer is the epilimnion. Okay, this is the warm upper layer. Sunlight gets in this, warms it up, changes the temperature, a lot of producer productivity in the epilimnion. Below this is what's called the thermocline. The thermocline. Now, a thermocline is a transition between the warm and cold water. So there's no specific depth to get to the thermocline. It varies from pond to pond, from lake to lake, from season to season. But if you were to swim in a lake, put on a pair of goggles, and you're swimming, when you're on the surface, you're in the epilimnion. As you dive down, you're going to go, whoa, that gets cold. The transition between the warm and the cold is your thermocline. If you can actually see it, if you have a pair of goggles on, it's kind of blurry because you have this warm and cold water mixing, creating this kind of blurry zone of water. But it's a distinct layer. It can be identified. You can go down, measure it, and see how deep it is for the thermocline. And again, that moves. It moves up and down based on seasonal changes. But when you swim down and you get into that cold water, now you're down into the hypolimnion, cold, deep water. So you're like, oh, that's cold, that's deeper, because there's not as much sunlight penetration. It doesn't reach down into the hypolimnion, and that's why the temperature is deeper. There's also a thing called overturn, where water temperatures flip based on seasonal changes. So we have a spring overturn and a fall overturn. So the layers stay consistent. Epilimnion is the top, thermocline is your transition, hypolimnion is below, benthos is the actual bottom substrate. Is it mud? Is it sand? Is it rock? And then the depth of these layers will change based on seasons, and the temperatures change based on seasons as well. But this is our general zonation in Lake Springfield or Lake Macoupin behind the building on campus or your farm pond, etc. Start at the top, work through the 4 layers, and then you're on the bottom. What is your bottom substrate? All right, so as we discuss freshwater ecosystems, we really, really need to be aware of what's called the watershed. This is all of the land that will influence a body of water. So it will all drain in. Maybe it drains into a creek, the creek connects to a river, the river connects to the lake, and so on. But here's the map of Lake Springfield's watershed. So everything in that kind of orangish color, that all connects to Lake Springfield. So you look at that and you go, oh, wow, I'm all the way down in Verdon and I influence Lake Springfield. I'm in Loami, I'm in Waverly, I'm in all these areas. Even though you're 30, 40 miles away, you're still influencing Lake Springfield because you're part of that watershed. So we have to really be conscious of what we're doing and how it connects to the watershed, which then connects to more water, to more water, to more water, eventually to the ocean, and then it comes back to us and it circles back to us. So terrestrial ecosystems have a significant influence on any freshwater system. It influences the marine system as well, but think about a lake. How much comes off of the land that goes into the lake? Whether it's leaves falling from the trees, it's agricultural runoff, it's discharge from a power plant. Terrestrial ecosystems play a big role in determining the conditions of that freshwater lake or river or stream and so on. So this is why we want to connect terrestrial ecosystems to aquatic ecosystems and look at how these two influence each other. So that's the bigger picture we have to think about. If I'm doing something here in the Midwest, how does that influence Lake Springfield? How does that influence the Mississippi? How does that influence the ocean? How does that circle back to influence us, again, back here in the Midwest in Springfield, Illinois? So lots of connections for us to try to make. All right, now let's look at a major wetland or major freshwater biome wetlands and take a look at what these are and what they do. You're going to hear different terms for wetlands. Swamps. Swamps tend to be a wetland with trees within it. Marshes tend to be wetlands without trees in it. And then you have these things called bogs and fens. These are waterlogged soils. Oh, that's spelled right. Soils that accumulate stuff called peat. A lot of mosses and vegetation that accumulates over time and becomes this stuff called peat. Peat actually is used as a fuel source in some regions where they have large amounts of bogs and fens. You can take it, pull it out, dry it out, and burn it. It's organic material. It's not a fossil fuel, but give it a couple million years and enough time compression, and you can turn peat into fossil fuels. So wetlands, huge productivity, huge producer productivity in the wetlands. We think about them sometimes and go, ugh, it's just a big, ugly, nasty swamp. But there is so much life here. There's so much producer productivity that we need to be more aware of wetlands. We need to understand the value of wetlands as filters, as sponges that absorb water, so we don't have such big runoff events from storms and storm surges and things of that nature. So they play a big role in helping terrestrial ecosystems stay stable, even though they are technically an freshwater aquatic system. So, all right, so now as we look at freshwater systems, the biodiversity is determined by a lot of different factors. And a lot of these will be the same factors that determine marine ecosystem diversity. How deep is it? Depth of your water influences productivity in your freshwater biome. What's the temperature? Are you a cold water stream or are you a warm water stream? What about nutrient load? The primary nutrients, phosphates, nitrates, that's P and N. You get a lot of those into your system. Fertilizer, your productivity goes up. Now what about sedimentation? How much silt, runoff do you get into that system from the terrestrial systems? So if you're right next to a farm field and there's no buffer zone, no grassy area that can catch the silt, that silt runs right into your stream. That changes the ecosystem. That changes the diversity of your stream if you have silt. Sometimes when there's too much silt, aquatic organisms, the different animals, can't reproduce because they can't lay their eggs in the silt. They need rocks to lay their eggs on or certain types of substrates for reproduction. What about the watershed? What's going on in the watershed, the flow of the watershed, what's happening upstream that connects to you downstream? Are you seeing discharge of pollutants, things of that nature? All those things influence your freshwater biome. What's the bottom substrate? Rocky substrates have higher oxygen levels than dirt substrates because as the water flows over the rocks, it moves, it rolls, it turns, and that produces oxygen. It creates more oxygenation in the water when it rolls and bubbles versus going over a dirty bottom. And then the other connections, the connections that your aquatic biome, your particular freshwater biome has to other aquatic systems. Everything influences everything else. It's like, think about the human body and the blood flow in the human body. You put something into one vein and it goes throughout the whole body and the entire vascular system. That's the same parallel we should think about with aquatic ecosystems. Each of these is a little vein or an artery that connects to everything else that eventually circles back. So all the aquatic ecosystems are connected, and they're also connected to the terrestrial ecosystems. So we can look at the ecosystems similar to looking at the human body. All right, one more part to this and we'll be done.